Welcome to What's in a Game. On today's show, we're talking first impressions of newly knighted head coach David Adelman. He gave his introductory press conference yesterday at Ball Arena, so we are going to break all of that down and more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean here with my co-host Will Jones. How are you doing today, Will?
The Thunder just moved on, and there's some realities around the NBA that I am personally now coming to grips with. So
what are those realities?
It's a little complicated. Just the Thunder, the salary cap realities with the CBA and paying players a lot and max contracts, how many you have, all that.
How does all of that make you feel? It's not sounding great.
Yes, it's let's see. Well, I don't know. We can get to it. We're going to talk a little bit about the NBA later, but yeah, it's the Nuggets are trying to squeeze out as much as they can with this Jokic era, which is what they should be doing. We got some comments about that from David Adelman for sure, but the Thunder are looking very formidable. I think they're likely to win the championship this year against the Pacers, but you never know. I'll be rooting for the Pacers, I suppose, but it's just like such a stark contrast between the era of the Clippers and the Warriors, who were paying so much, spending unlimited amounts and not caring, to then swinging all the way to this era where contenders are struggling to add pieces around previous championship cores and trying to compete with young teams who are drafting high after tanking and competing. So yeah, but my whole rant about Presti winning Executive of the Year last year is looking pretty good, though, because goddamn.
Did he win it last year? He didn't, right? Wasn't it Stevens? And you thought he should. You thought Presti should have won it last year.
Yes.
Because you thought that drafting didn't factor as much into the award because it is like a year by year thing. In drafting, it takes time for those, results to come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of our very early episodes last year. It's all coming back to me, our awards show.
But he got Caruso and Hartenstein, so now he can look
That's true.
Really good.
And so I think he won it this year. Yep. I don't know if Executive of the Year has been announced yet. They took a while for MVP. I kind of forgot about all the other awards. So
yes.
Oh, thank you, Snoozer. I hope you are also having a terrific day. For the audio listeners, Snoozer said that I hope everybody is having a terrific day, except Calvin Booth. We're going to get to some of that. I can certainly understand the sentiment. But as the deeper we get into this thing, the more I'm seeing that a lot of the issues that people attributed sort of solely to Calvin Booth were not just about him. As it turns out, it takes more than one man to ruin an organization or, rot an organization. I don't know. All right, let's get to our big story, big segment of the day, which is David Adelman had his introductory press conference. As I mentioned on our last show, this actually happened. On the show before that, I was like, are we going to get one of these or not? After Adelman was just announced as the head coach, I think Josh mentioned that he kind of lets everybody go and unwind at the end of the season, but he had talked to Adelman, I guess, before Memorial Day weekend, and then just let him kind of take that long weekend off. And then they decided to have this intro press conference at Ball Arena. Adelman showed up in a suit. What did you think of the general optics of all that? Josh was also in a suit, which he hadn't been in any of the previous two press conferences we've gotten in the last month and a half.
The optics seem really good. I am not someone who goes to Ball Arena for those things, obviously, but it was interesting hearing Adam's comments and just the DNVR guys' comments on it, because they thought it was a little more like showy than other press conferences have been in the past, which I think is like a kind of cool point. They were saying the Cronkies maybe don't focus enough on the presentation and how things are coming across. And we had pretty funny moments with Calvin Booth, maybe saying a little bit too much to certain reporters at times. So maybe a little more controlled and intentional about the introduction, which I'm happy for Adelman, because I think it should be treated with a little bit of grandeur, so to say, and not just be like, he was already here, so we don't have to do much. Like treating him like, and
Right.
honoring him for getting this big job and his first head coaching job, and it's with the Nuggets. I hope that they do treat him well. And I mean, before we get to the specifics, I thought it was like pretty good and positive. I liked how he sounded. We can talk about the ideas and what we agree with or not, but I think overall, like, he sounded pretty good.
Yeah, I think I generally agree with that. In terms of the overall optics, now I believe Adelman's going to be the 23rd head coach in franchise history, so that's a pretty big deal. And as he mentioned during his press conference, there are only 30 of these jobs in the NBA, right? And he's got one of them, and he was very like he opened it with like a line that was like, it's going to sound like I won an Oscar, but then he kind of goes into the list of people that he's kind of thanking for helping him get to this moment. And he treated it like it was a big deal, and I definitely buy that for him, especially a guy being the son of a coach. Like, you get how tough this job is, how hard it is to get one of these jobs, and he's at least outwardly treating it like a big opportunity. And he sounds pretty like fortunate to be in this position. So that sounded good. All right, let's get to the actual substance of this. Actually, on the point that you just made, Will, about the optics and paying attention to that, because yeah, he's been here, but now he's the head coach. Like, things should be different. I made this point on 2 shows ago when we weren't sure if we were going to get an introductory press conference. It's like, that would be really bad optics, because it kind of sounds like you're treating it like nothing is going to change. And that might be the case anyway, but at least you treat it like, nope, we're getting a new head coach. Like, we have to acknowledge that, and talk about it as we're forging a new path forward kind of thing. So fitting that the first segment that I've got here is, what will David Adelman do differently, right? That's kind of the general topic of the questions that he was asked at this press conference. The first thing that came up is what's going on with player development and how that stuff is going to start in the summer. He talked about wanting to gain better alignment between the coaching staff, like as a whole, and the each player's personal player development coaches that all of these NBA players have. These guys are worth millions of dollars, and they work on their skills both in the season and also especially in the off season with their own personal trainers and personal player development coaches. And so Adelman wanted to have more I guess alignment and active communication there. He really emphasized, like, yeah, guys are going to work on their games during the summer, but we need them to work on the things that we need them to be good at. What was your impression of like that whole that specific section there, where he's talking about what guys need to work on in the summer? And it seemed like it was more directed toward the young players on the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of what you expect. You expect that the younger guys are going to be working on the physical traits. He said, getting stronger with them, and it's not necessarily just the mental side, but the physical side that they need to start developing. And it's like, you think of Peyton Watson needs to get stronger and bigger, possibly Strother as well. Obviously, the internal development sent some red flags through all of Nuggets Nation, but there is going to have to be some internal development for sure, regardless of if they make some extreme change or not, like with Duran and those players. So yeah, I think it's what you expect. I like that he talked about how he's going to have to check in with them more, and right now maybe it's not the time because it's so early, but at some point he will. But yeah, the summer, I think just overall the message about the summer and what guys need to do to improve their games was good. And saying you don't have to become an all NBA player. You just have to simplify things, come up with your counters, come up with those skills, work on the corner threes, basic stuff that they should be able to expect. And I like that overall. But hopefully the vets take note of that too and say, yeah, I got to work this summer too and come into the season in shape.
So that was definitely another topic that came up with the vets. But I before we move on to that, I want to pull a couple of quotes from the presser about the young guys. One of the things he talked about was like, every guy goes into summer and, works on their game as if they want to be an all NBA first team member. But he said, quote, I want guys to simplify their game and master a couple things that they can do in games, right? Um, this is definitely, I think, more on like Duran, Julian Payton, as we've mentioned here. But I think Payton especially is somebody who offensively, like, I think there have been a lot of people that um wanted to give Peyton as much benefit of the doubt over the last couple of years as as possible with respect to growing in his offensive game to the point where like we know where to use him and uh putting a little bit more of the blame on the coaching staff for like not putting him in a position to where we were enhancing his strengths, right? I think some people were like we should use him in the dunker spot more. Other people are like he's not a good finisher, like he shouldn't be used in the dunker spot. He should have the ball in his hands more. Well, he's not actually that great with the ball in his hands unless it's like in transition, and even then you're like, oh man, the finishing, right? So I do think that this idea of can we figure out what your strength actually is? Like, can you get to that point individually as a player so that we can actually do that with you? Like, so that we can actually use that skill in the games? Like, can you master one or a couple of things that you feel confident you can absolutely do consistently in games? Like, that's the thing we've seen with Peyton and Julian to a lesser extent is just like so many flashes of like, his sophomore year, he had this kind of free throw line midi that he was hitting consistently. That not so much this year. Occasionally we'd get a floater, uh, but the rim finishing on top of that being an issue is like problem. Sometimes we get cool ball handling flashes, especially in transition, where he finds like a good pass, and other times it's like, what are we doing? Everything looks completely out of control, kind of thing. And so finding that consistency, I think, will make the way that they can find that consistency is by focusing in on fewer skills. I'm
Mm-hmm.
less worried about Julian in this sense, not just because he's constantly he talked to somebody after this press conference, which he was in attendance, about how I think it was Adam Mares who was there and asked him, and Julian said he's gonna be in Denver all summer and just commute home to Las Vegas on weekends. And
Mm-hmm.
he's a little bit of a teacher's pet. We kind of clocked that last summer as he
Yeah, he
spent
did
his
that
entire summer
too.
in Denver, right? That's not the only reason I'm not worried about Julian is because he is an offensive player. Like he's been working on these skills his entire, career up until this point. Um, so he's more inclined towards those skills, and it's more about polishing at this point. With Peyton, it's really like that development curve is steeper because he doesn't have any kind of like broad base of those skills to where he probably or any of us watching feels comfortable with him doing any one thing, whether it's catch and shoot, handling the ball, finishing a play. It's like, okay, we gotta focus on something here.
But hopefully, him talking about how they just need to simplify their game helps a little bit. Like, I don't know what he's been focusing on. I'm sure on some level he's working on his shot for sure, because that's very important.
Yeah.
What else is he doing? Like, rim finishing stuff. I don't even know. Like, all you have to do is really get that shooting up. I don't really know what other skills I need him to do at this point, just because of where he would be in the pecking order offensively. But he just got to be able to. I don't know what he needs to add to his game, but shooting would be awesome.
Yeah, totally agree. Because I think everybody needs to shoot regardless of what their particular strength is. And honestly, like Peyton putting up the shot was less of my worry this season. Again, like so many of my particular gripes with Peyton's offensive development could have been like largely forgiven, especially because he was only a third year player and all of this. If he could just make his layups, like that's the worst things. It's like that's
Just
the easiest
layups.
shot you're going to get. You're going to get those opportunities because Jokic is going to find you because other guys are going to find you. We just need you to make those. And if you can't do those and you're struggling in these other areas, it's like tough, right? All right, so next in this section here about what DA wants to do differently. Okay, I liked this. So Adelman talked about wanting to try out a lot of new things offensively, especially in training camp. This is whether or not these things work and they like keep them or kind of discard certain plays or actions that are run for guys and whatever. But I like that he sort of framed it as like, I want to give these guys, especially the ones who have been here for a while, something to come back to that excites them. Like he used that word, excites them. And I do think as much as this is something I felt like Denver was a lot better about in 23 was like there were a lot of things just kind of run for to be fair for guys that had a little bit more skill. You had like KCP had his like free throw line midi that was always run for him. Bruce Brown, freelanced all over the place, especially, in transition. And I was never worried about like, is Bruce going to get touch this kind of thing. But, when you have more guys, especially the ones that have been here for a while, doing the same things over and over again throughout the years, it's less exciting to come back to training camp. And I think he's trying to at least up the vibes for that like early part of the year. Like, okay, I'm gonna get involved in like a different way. We're gonna try out some things for me. I don't know how that's actually gonna manifest. And even Adelman was like, we're probably gonna end up discarding like some good chunk of these things if they, don't work. But I really I appreciated that as like a paying attention to outside of the need for creativity from the X's and O's side, but the need for creativity from like a vibes perspective.
Yeah, I think that I feel a lot of that as a fan too. And I think I place a lot of my excitement into new players joining the roster, but it can also come in the form of just new ideas and new ways to play defensively and in offense, like
That's
getting
music to Josh Kroenke's ears.
getting Mike something to do on offense, like running through him a little bit more, going to zone more on defense, like Adelman said he wanted to do. Just something that can freshen it up. I mean, thankfully, I don't know. Thankfully, I don't want to say that, but Malone's not there anymore. So just by Adelman being a new coach, probably is going to bring some excitement. Though they already experienced him in the playoffs, how much of that will carry over into next season? But hopefully, there's a lot of runway for them to enjoy Adelman as the coach. So that's a positive thing. And I do wonder what the vets specifically are going to try to be working on. Like hopefully, AG keeps practicing his shot. Hopefully, he can have a healthier season next year. Jamal's got to be in shape. Maybe he'll come into shape into training camp for the first time in his career. Who knows? And I don't want to distract.
Can I just like tangent on that briefly?
Sure.
I completely like we're gonna get to DA's comments about the conditioning stuff, but the Jamal thing specifically, it's so fascinating how sort of we talked on our last show about how, following the playoffs, with Mike and Russ specifically, they had a really rough series, especially against OKC, but with Mike it was both series. Um Especially, and you were like, well, we could attribute it to the shoulder, but we could also say like this is just how Mike has looked against physical defenses in the playoffs, right? With Jamal, it's interesting because of this conditioning question has been an issue for his entire career. But when you look at his last 4 off seasons straight, he's had a really good excuse for the way that he comes into the season, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
last year it was the Olympics. The year before that it was coming off of the title. The year before that he was coming off of ACL rehab. The year before that was that was he wasn't coming back because he had the ACL. So actually 5, because the year before that, it was the bubble with the 1 month off season, and like Jamal and a bunch of other guys that made the conference finals or later got injured that year in like terrible fashion. They had all short off seasons and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows if you can attribute it to that, but it was like, well, everyone's gonna that's 5 years in a row that like I don't like it could be Jamal, right? Because it's not like other guys didn't come off a championship run or play in the Olympics and all of that. But it's sort of like, well, each of these excuses has sort of augmented the thing that we sort of know about him already, or at least thought about him. Um, he has an opportunity to change that narrative if he comes, into the season in shape. But
Well,
yeah, I just wanted to.
should fans actually consider so much context with their opinions, Grace?
No, absolutely not.
No, but what I was gonna say too, just to add on to that point, is Jokic said that playing in the Olympics might have made him play better coming into the season, which I thought was an interesting point. And I think, yeah,
Play
Voya,
better, but Jokic was also not in the best shape when he showed up to training camp.
yeah, it could be. But I
Like
think,
he was definitely on the bigger side, and I know like Ogie in some interviews early in the season, Stojakovic on the Nuggets coaching staff talked about how some of that was intentional, but it's like it's also kind of convenient. I was looking back at the some clips from the title run. I'm like, Jokic was quite a bit smaller than he is
oh
today.
yeah,
That's all I'm saying is like playing better. Yeah, obviously, right? Like Jokic was like MVP favorite through the first however many games this season. He was doing like crazy things, especially on offense. But um as we that's like a separate question from like overall conditioning and like what you're giving on both ends of the floor and that kind of thing. But I'm
yeah, I think,
just to be fair.
right. But I do think there's something to it. And Voya Medic, who our friend from Twitter and who joined our show for the Olympic preview that we did, talked about how important it can be for players to play with FIBA rules or in the Olympics or in the summer, and how a lot of those guys come back and have like I don't know how much improved, but improved seasons in the NBA than they previously had. And I do think there's something about like keeping your tools sharp by playing in that
Sure.
competition. I don't know how much fatigue factors into it playing in the Olympics. So it can go both ways a little
Jamal was
bit.
also recovering from an
Yes.
injury that he had at the end of the season.
And
He
that's
probably
the,
shouldn't have played in the Olympics. I
yeah.
think fans of Team Canada might agree with us based on his performance there.
That's
Um,
the thing,
yeah.
is I thought for sure Jamal would come into this season looking really good because of the narratives around him, but he was injured, still dealing with possibly plantar fasciitis, I think he said right at
Oh,
the
I forgot
beginning of
about
this
that. Yeah,
season.
that too.
And he was up for the contract extension, and according to all those reports was maybe on the trade block. So it was like I kind of get why maybe he took it a little easy in that offseason with the extension and all that. So
With the exception of playing in the Olympics. It
yeah,
was
with the
just like
exception of
very
that.
incongruous, like
Mm-hmm.
very more tumultuous summer than we might have. And obviously, on top of all that, he was a new father, which
Oh
we
yeah.
learned later, way later. At least
So
got it confirmed way later. So
uh, I'm
there's a lot
back.
going on there.
I'm back to expecting that he'll fully come back in shape, and then I could be disappointed. Like fool me 6 times, shame on me for
Yeah.
the 5th time.
Okay, so we talked about training camp. Hopefully, guys come in shape, and part of I think coming back in shape is having something exciting to come back to, right? So I think that's part of what Adelman is going for here. All right, still on what Adelman will do differently. He talked about wanting to be a lot more creative defensively, similar to how they were in the playoffs. He's like, I want to play more zone. Like he was pretty explicit about that point, especially because quote, we have high IQ guys, high IQ players that can, execute some more creative defensive schemes that aren't so physically taxing as some of the more aggressive schemes. I Okay, so I want to add an additional quote to this because Adelman actually gave an interview to Altitude Sports Radio after his introductory presser. In that interview, he actually mentioned, actually that was where he mentioned the one in the summer, having guys kind of focus on one or two things that they can add to their game. So if you don't remember that quote from the press conference, that's where I got it from. If you want to check out his interview with Altitude Sports. The other quote that I have here is from him mentioning that toward the end of his career, Tim Duncan with the Spurs got to basically just zone up and like hang out around the rim a lot and kind of direct traffic on defense. They were kind of playing man, but not really when it came to him. And that's sort of the him pointing to that example specifically sort of shades the comments about defensive creativity having less to do with what we want to take away from other teams and more to do with getting our guys through the regular season physically intact, and especially Jokic. I do have, before I get to that, actually, why don't I get your impression on the defensive creativity side of things, how that ties into, what he did in the playoffs and all of that.
I like the idea of maybe using more zone because, like, Hastings asked him, like, that's a good way to get him some rest while he's still in the game by using some zone. But like Adelman said smartly, they do have to get better at it because there are a lot of times in a zone where Jokic can be left on a low man type position and anyone can just back cut from there or just drive right past him baseline and score because he just can't move in space super quickly. So they're going to have to really get used to playing it with Jokic and those around him by, I mean, I hate to put it this way, but covering up some of his deficiencies in that scheme. But the like zone they were playing was kind of like a rare one that's not in the NBA a lot. They could do different types of formations of zone. Yeah. So there's other zones that they could do and try and like use in specific situations, but it's like
no more 2-3 zone. They're so lazy with it. Like,
yeah.
That's the look that everybody's citing, by the way. That was not the one that helped us get stops. That was just like weird one. They'd start every like first quarter in like game one, and I hated it. And because the other team was immediately scoring on it because nobody's flying around. Like, it was a mess. The question I have about this though is based on comments that we heard from Matt Moore over at Locked On Nuggets throughout the season when Malone was there, especially toward the end, where the reason that they play so much of their base scheme in the regular season, obviously things changed in the playoffs after DA took over, is that some guys were struggling to handle the mental burden associated with some of these newer schemes. So they're playing like their normal like at level and man defense because or just switching because it's simpler, and there are guys that are struggling to execute these coverages. So you could look at it not so generously and be like, well, I don't know how this is going to last when you're talking about an expanded rotation, because let's say the playoffs, like, yeah, you've got your 7 guys, 6.5 guys where everybody's locked into the scheme, so we can make that work. It gets a lot more complicated when you have more people that have to be on the same page and know what's coming in, knowing their personnel, all this stuff, and you're not talking about just like basic base defensive coverages that the team is used to. Looking at it generously, you can say this is Adelman issuing a mental challenge to the entire team and saying, this is how I want us to play. And I know that you guys have it in you to there was reporting that Mike had never played zone prior to the Clipper series. That's Hurricane T-Bag. I know who this is.
Hurricane, thanks for being
That's
here.
not true. They've definitely played zone for stretches in the past. It was just at much higher volume, and they tried a couple of different zones out in the playoffs. But right, the generous interpretation of this from Adelman is like, I know you guys are smart enough to get this. whether you as a fan agree or not. It's him challenging the team to be like, this is how I want us to play. And it's actually going to help you get through the regular season. And it's going to, help us be better in May if we can execute this stuff in, December. Any thoughts on the pace discussion? Yes, we're going to talk about that in our next section, which I had one more thing about the defense, which was just nobody asked if we're going to force more turnovers, which I would like to know Adelman's thoughts on this. Just because Denver is consistently like falling way, way, way back of the league in this regard. Even though they actually forced more turnovers this year, everybody forced even more, so they actually fell in terms of turnover percentage relative to the rest of the league.
Yeah. Plus,
And
does
go ahead.
that become like a trend? People really trying to get that up with the OKC Thunder
Right,
having
just
as
to
much
sort of,
success. The copycat league.
It is a copycat league, that is for sure. And I think on a previous show, I'm going to look this up right now with turnover percentage. When you're looking at the top 10 defenses, half of them this season were top 10 in turnover percentage, like opponent turnover percentage. So, what you'd like to see there, actually, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, no, 6 of them. And none of them were bottom 10 except for Boston. Like that's just a team that, thrives on their positional defense. So if Denver's going to get up there or close to it, it feels like that's an area where they don't have to like be top 3 in forcing turnovers, but it needs to be more of an emphasis than it is, and that it really isn't right now. Right. Okay. So we'll talk about the pace discussion because Adelman wants to handle the regular season quite a bit differently than last year. So we talked about how DA is going to, do things a little bit differently with our defense, with the summers, and how he's going to handle training camp. The next section I have here is how Adelman wants to handle the regular season. And I think this is a good set of questions because obviously we get 3 regular season games at the end of the year with Adelman, and then from there on it's like I'm a playoff coach now. Like I don't know how much you can take away from his overall performance in the playoffs relative to being a regular season coach, because I just think the 82 game grind, even though I think the regular season matters, I do think it is different fundamentally than the playoffs. It kind of takes, it works a different part of your brain both as a player and as a coach, right? And different parts of your body even when you consider the physical toll of that grind. All right, so first set of questions, totally in line and expected, is like, how are you gonna deal with getting these young guys to develop to where you need them when you're trying to win games? And Adam was just like, we're going to try to balance winning with development. So, this is what a head coach will do, right? Or will say. It's like, my job is to win games, right? We talked earlier about wanting guys to come back into the regular season or come back at the beginning of the regular season conditioned. And Adelman made a really big point about wanting to get off to a better start next season. And part of that is the conditioning question. Because he sort of sees it as a way to be able to, quote unquote, maintenance the roster throughout the year if you're able to get off to a better start, especially in a very competitive Western Conference. Will, how different does any of this sound from Malone so far?
Well, Malone always talks about how he wants to improve the defense and be like a top 5 defense. And I feel like he didn't say as much about conditioning, except for in like exit interview type press conferences where he was like, yeah, there were guys still playing in his shape. He never really made a point to call it out, at least to my mind, in the training camp kind of stage. It's almost like used as an excuse rather than like setting it as a goal. I could be wrong about that, but I mean, I like the idea of getting off to a good start, and I like the idea of trying to get something to excite the players through the regular season. And I don't know if it's me projecting my feelings on the regular season because I am pretty thirsty to get to the playoffs a lot of the times. And I think the Nuggets, after winning the championship, wanting to play like playoff basketball and like tactical basketball, they're pretty impatient in that regard. So they're going to have to find a way to take the regular season a little bit more seriously than we have the past 2 seasons, I believe. So that would be a good thing to start with. I'm looking at some of these comments and questions in the chat and wondering if we can work these in. Jay Kerr says, wondering if Nuggets hoping that MPJ goes on a brief hot streak to increase his capital, then trade him. Should he improve his mid range? Yeah, well, when we hire a GM finally, maybe that's some things he can answer about what he sees with the team and what approach we might take at a deadline type of question, which we'll find out after the summer's ended if there's any trades that happen or not, and when training camp starts for sure. Is that part of the strong start? Is that a lot of these guys had worked on their games in the summer, as we just talked about with the young guys, and we don't know necessarily what skills the vets are going to add, but he definitely wants more shooters, more consistent shooting. I don't know if you have that lined up in a specific segment, Grace, but you know.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the shooting. It's more on the Josh Kroenke internal development conversation.
Should the
Nuggets threaten Jamal Murray with a massive fine if he doesn't come to camp in shape? No, because the Players Association is not going to let that fly.
Yeah.
Actually, let's see here. There was a note that I had here about dealing with the grind of the regular season. So, you want guys to care. Actually, you know what? Before I get to that, the comment that we had about Mike and like improving his trade value and all of this, I don't think that DA's comments about starting the regular season had literally anything to do with Michael Porter Jr. He was our second best player through mid-December last year. He seems to always come ready to go. He does well in the early parts of the season. MPJ really tailed off after the All-Star break, which was both following the hamstring injury that he sustained right before the All-Star break, and I believe it was right after the All-Star break that he broke his drop foot brace and had to get a new one. The old one he had fully broken in over years, and the new one, the brace that he wears to deal with the nerve damage from his last back surgery that sort of makes it so he can't fully operate his is it both feet or just the one? I don't know. The new brace, like he has to break it in, and obviously as a shooter, like if your balance is off, you're kind of cooked, and that's basically what we saw at the end of the year. It wasn't just the playoffs, but obviously that's another thing that plays into sort of the list of bullet points for MPJ to have like pretty decent excuses for his showing in the playoffs, if we're being honest. MPJ's regular seasons are largely not an issue. He did go through like a mini slump around the time that like the Zach LaVine rumors came out. It's just the 1 foot. Thank you, Hurricane T-bag. But yeah, I'm not worried about Mike caring enough to come into the regular season in shape. That's not really
I don't know if you guys remember the narratives around Mike at the beginning of the season was like, whoa, it's the best shape he's been in. He's a workhorse. He's played 80 games in these last 2 regular seasons, things like that.
Yeah.
Just kind of falls apart in the playoffs every once in a while. Or, I mean, I get that is a big deal. I'm not trying to minimize it. It's just, yeah, I agree. His regular seasons aren't terrible. It's just like up in the air whether they're trying to trade him or not and what they think the priority should be with the team.
He played 77 games this year. I think the only starter who played more was Christian.
Yep.
By the way.
Missouri says Malone hope Jamal will read between the lines. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But I think overall, like the sentiment is DA made it clear he wants the players to come in ready to go, to get off to a fast start. Hopefully it was a productive summer, like improving parts of your game, simplifying parts of your game. And we'll see what they do roster-wise and how to like add some more consistency to the bench, which I'm sure is on their radar.
Yeah. Okay. So we're in the middle of the regular season now. We're talking about, let's say all the guys are ready to go physically. Jamal's gonna make shots, as TA said. He's not gonna miss shots. Actually, is what he said. Uh, there was a question about, what it's going to be like dealing with the grind of the regular season and kind of getting guys to, it's one thing to bench a guy in the middle of the playoffs when you're trying to win a game and whatever, but on a Tuesday against the Pistons or whatever it is in December, how is DA going to sort of handle that and like the politics of that? And he gave a very interesting answer. He basically said, I'm going to remind them that the last 2 years they lost in game 7 of round 2. And so what they need to do to get to achieve their goals, which is a championship, uh, means maintaining their professionalism throughout the season. And that means not, pouting if you get benched, for example. That like really perked my ears up because it was such a very specific. I think this is going to be the thing I go to motivate players. And he kind of had that answer ready. I don't know if he thought he was going to be asked about that sort of thing, or if he was already sort of working on like what's my sort of internal narrative going to be when it comes to getting the locker room motivated. But what was your reaction to DA saying that's the well that he's going to go back to in the middle of the regular season?
My first thought is that Jokic has been asked that question a lot. Like, did the loss in Game 7 last year fuel you in this playoff series? And he's like, no, I don't even think about it. I just focus on the game ahead of me and like the task ahead of me. So it's not very Jokic like, at least, to use that as motivational fuel if you are to take that into account. But I think like the general sentiment is just like our goal is the championship, and we've come short of that the last 2 years. So you have to be professional and not necessarily care about your playing time or if you're closing, or if you're bench, if you don't have it at a certain point, to put the goal of the team ahead of yourself. And I think that that's going to be a prevailing sentiment with Adelman and Kroenke and the new GM.
Yeah. To me, I was like, this is gonna get old really fast. If I'm the players, there's a lot made of like Malone's message got stale, blah blah blah. I don't want to hear about Game 7 losses in November against the Wizards.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I doubt the players do either, because like you said, Jokic is like, nope, that's the past, whatever. I don't think Jokic is going to be the one that like this message is going to be directed to necessarily. But I do think that like you talk about players not like they shouldn't have to care about these things. If you're Peyton Watson and you are entering your 4th year in the NBA, the last year of your rookie scale contract, and you are up for an extension both this summer and possibly next summer, depending on how this year goes. And you're seeing like, in all likelihood, Christian Brown's going to get extended this summer. I don't know if Peyton Watson is. And you're like, well, Christian, like he got to start, he got to get all these transition points, and now he's going to get, unideally $30 million a year, whatever. And you're like, man, I wish I got more touches. I wish I got more shots, because like that's just the situation that I'm in the NBA. I think it's difficult to tell that person to be like, well, we lost in Game 7 round 2. So if you're Peyton, you're like, well, I didn't play in Game 7 the year before that, and in Game 7 this year I played, and it like didn't matter. And like nothing I did in the playoffs like really ultimately mattered. Well, because we didn't win, but even like in terms of impact, whatever, there were games where I was only playing 10 minutes a game, whatever. I think that's difficult. And that's a situation that you're in that is different than the title year when everybody was paid except for Bruce and Jeff. And, you could say, like, well, Peyton Watson's supposed to be our Jeff. Jeff has been in the NBA for however many years he's been, right? They call him Unk. He's made his money. He made a little bit more money when he went to the Rockets last year. Okay. Compared to a 23-year-old NBA player who's still trying to make his way, right? So I don't think that player wants to hear about Game 7. And this quote made me even more curious to know how Adelman is going to navigate the politics with these young players on the team.
Yeah, and to that point, Hurricane says, wonder if players will care less about not closing or playing if they know they can find their way back into playing time, which I think is like a decent point for sure. That's something that Adelman seemed to be able or seemed to put forth when he just took over was like, hey, if Russ doesn't have it tonight, I'll bench him. I'll play someone else. I benched Mike tonight. That doesn't mean he's benched permanently. I'll play him the next game and see who has it then. It did seem to me like the team kind of wanted that.
Yeah, but after round 1, Pickett didn't play. Even in
Yeah.
bad, like, it was like, well, that was like a tone. There were a couple of tone setting games early on, but that doesn't mean that that's what he was going to stick to consistently. Like, coaches are going to go with the guys they trust. I think every coach has their guys. It doesn't really,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Hey.
Thunder fans complain about how little Dagnall plays Aaron Wiggins, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, why do you keep going back to Jalen Williams, like big Jalen Williams? And why does Aaron Wiggins get so little playing time? That kind of,
It,
every coach has these things. It really doesn't matter.
yeah, he'll have
Uh,
his quirks and it'll be a challenge that he's going to have to work through with the rotations and the bench and the non-Jokic minutes, the staggers, everything we talk about throughout the season. He's going to be dealing with as a first-time coach. So we'll see how he approaches it. But I think the team doesn't necessarily want certain guys to have preferential treatment if the rumors are to be true. There's multiple reports that back that up, including the Russ and AG locker room confrontation where if Russ is complaining about not closing and AG confronts him, that's a sign that one of the leaders of the team has a good idea in his head that you can't just be putting yourself first over the team. Now, I don't think that confrontation was a huge deal. It's just like players holding each other accountable, which, as Adelman said, if he's just the shepherd to this team and it's their team and they have to do it their way, the players are going to have to hold each other accountable too and maintain this professionalism and not be complaining about minutes and such. So
yeah, and that was my next point, is that he plans to continue the responsibility that he gave the players in the playoffs and at the end of the regular season when he took over, that they're gonna be the ones that are communicating and policing each other. I said at the time, I think this is great. Like, they should be taking more responsibility. It is their team, all of that stuff. But I also think there's a reason that this has been such a quiet locker room. It's part of the disposition of these players. And it's hard to continuously um, be the bad guy when all of you don't want to like be the bad guy. And sometimes you have to be. And it's a different grind in the 82 game season. So I'm really curious to see how that actually continues. I think Adelman is ambitious in this goal, like rightfully so, because I think it is the way that this team has to, move forward. But I also think it would be helpful if we had a few more communicative vets on the team, especially when you're talking about having so many like super young players. Because I think Christian, it's like Jalen Pickett is like the same age or older than like half the roster almost.
mm-hmm.
Um, and like Christian, I think is right behind him or like PJ Hall. That's tough.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
expect those young players to be the voices
yeah.
and the owners of the team. Like the idea that it's their team, it's really Jokic and Jamal and
No, no, no. I'm
AD.
saying like you have like I'm talking about like bridging that gap between them and the and the core vets, because I frankly just don't expect these guys to consistently keep talking to each other. I think that's part of what they miss so much about Jeff Green, is that he's the one that hosted the that dinner after their loss in game 2 to the Miami Heat, right? To kind of get everybody's minds reset and be like, hey guys, we can still do this kind of thing. um yeah, we'll see. I think there was a heavy emphasis on regular season professionalism in this press conference, which I thought was interesting because it sort of implies that that wasn't there this year. Um, we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the Josh conversation. Okay, so related to this, David Adelman said that he wants the personality of the team to be more consistent throughout the season. He contrasted that obviously to this last year. He said, I thought last year we were up and down. We had success, but it didn't seem like it was a steady rise. And I think that's the thing you have to feel throughout a year. You want to go into the playoffs feeling the way that we did, like we had momentum, like you were again on this steady rise. What do you think about this? And what did it tell you about how Adelman saw last season, like this past season?
I think it just points, to the idea of wanting the team to be more gelled, maybe having more fun throughout the season. I certainly felt like they didn't look like they were having a lot of fun. And I think, who was it? I think AG said in his post game after we got eliminated that he'll have to take a bit of time to think about how the season went, like with the ups and downs with the players and how gelled they were. And he was like, once I process that, I could probably answer that. But right now I can't, which told me that there was at least some pretty heavy ups and downs with the locker room and how they were all vibing. So yeah, that's something that they're going to have to do. And if they were feeling stale, especially with Malone and the team and their play style, and Josh Kroenke clearly felt that way by making that organizational shakeup and wanting to spark the players, that kind of spark and liveliness of play again needs to come to the forefront for sure. I think some of that is partly having more depth so that they don't feel like they're being run ragged throughout the whole regular season. But
yeah. Speaking of being run ragged, the Denver Nuggets played very, very fast last year, especially for the first 3 quarters of the season where they were top 5 in pace. A lot of that was, when Russ was getting more minutes, he was filling in for Jamal, he was playing well with Jokic and all of that. And also Christian was getting transition points. That didn't last through the end of the season and especially during the playoffs. And Adelman noticed that as well. He says he wants the team to play slower and work on being an execution team again. This came, I'm looking through the transcript here. The question was about what he wants to do differently offensively. And it was interesting because this answer is a lot more based on getting the small details right and not necessarily changing the system. 2 ways you can look at this is, well, you were the offensive coordinator last year. Why is it that the team wasn't sharp enough in their execution by the end of the season, doing a lot of the same things that they've been doing over the last couple of years with, you as offensive coordinator, lead assistant coach? Do you take some responsibility in that too? Okay. The other way you can look at this is the guys just really didn't give an F this season, and they were just going through the motions, and that's true. And we're going to talk about what that means for the culture, of the team of the organization. But now with DA here, with Malone gone, they're going to care again, and DA is going to make them focus on the details. This is something, Will, that you and I talked about extensively when we were talking through the Minnesota Timberwolves series last year, that I was like, there's ways to break this team offensively. And when we have our good offensive execution games, we're constantly getting into things quickly, semi-transition, we've got our screen set, we're ready to start that action, we get things going. But here, Adelman is sort of contrasting execution with pace. I'm trying to find the okay, here's the exact quote. The major goal for us is to get back to being an execution-based team. And if that takes away some of our pace numbers or whatever the analytics want to say, a little shady comment there, I think. I think that's okay if it wins you a game in May as opposed to, playing a game in December. It's a very different style of basketball. Um, what do you think of that?
I mean, clearly he has his own ideas. He said also that when you're the assistant, your job is to like assist the head coach's kind of ideas and implement that. And clearly he's going to have his own ideas now, and he knows the game. And I think this is part of that. And he must feel that they've gone away a little bit from the identity of the championship team. If he says that, the execution has eroded, and we were a team that was like a slower paced, heavy half court offense type team. Like we played better offense, almost purposefully not trying to score in transition and just slow down and play in the half court. That obviously changed with Russ and CB and like the personnel being different and playing more. I don't know. Like, what do you think slowing down is going to help execute like a half court offense, or, like, I don't know. I could see both sides. Like, there's advantages to playing pace and getting those younger players easier looks than having to like, be like high IQ execution type players when they're so raw still. But
Well, I think if the point is to get these players ready for the playoffs, like they have to be able to do the half court stuff. So it's less about like, well, we don't want them to play in transition. It's more like we have to make sure that they're able to play at a high level in the half court. Um, and I think Matt Moore made this point on Locked On Nuggets, and I think Adam Baris also had his reaction to this as sort of being a bit skeptical because they both of them I think really like how the Pacers play. They get into their stuff really fast and all of that. But like I just mentioned, when we talked about our last year when we did our series preview and we were going throughout the Wolves series last year and the games that Denver was good and won, is like they were really sharp with their offensive execution. And I want to add, when you say like, well, what does offensive execution even mean? What are these details that Adelman is talking about? On that Altitude Sports radio interview, he actually talked very specifically about we need to have better physicality and screens when you're talking about, the margins of not getting pushed off your spots on offense, whether you're on the ball or off the ball, and having better both contact on your screens and also knowing your screening angles uh better so that you're executing the plays sharper, so that you're creating the separation that you need to create for the players that are involved, whether it's MPJ, AG, Jamal, Jokic, Christian, right? And also he didn't mention this, but it's something that I imagine is going to be part of this discussion, and why he said it's difficult to sort of not implement but improve this stuff in a short period of time without a training camp and without live game reps is um rhythm, right? Like you have to be setting the screens at the right time, cutting at the right time so that you're uh more in line with your spacing principles. There was that game this it was in the OKC series where on one of the off days, the in between games and the media days, he talked about how like we went over spacing. And then the next game happened and I was just like, where was any of that? Because there was guys like two guys cutting into the lane at the same time while AG was posting up or whatever. I'm just like, what is going on here? I think that's the kind of stuff that he's talking about too, is timing, like screens and timing. Like uh these are the bones of every offense, right? Unless you're, an isolation team, which we are not. True. Yes, absolutely. And so Hurricane Teabag mentioned that. So you're talking about personnel in terms of shooting. But Hurricane Teabag said, if he wants better screens, I really wonder how they'll look at a backup five, in that they should have one. Like, that is one of the positions I'm most curious about this summer because if we're going for nothing will fundamentally change model with respect to the rest of the roster, we should at least have a backup 5 because we know Duran isn't one. We know Zeke isn't one. We know DJ is too old to play every day. Somebody needs to be playing backup 5 and setting screens and either rolling or playing the DHO game with these guys. I don't know.
Sorry, yeah, I was muted. You can hear me now, though.
Yes. So yeah, I think that it's gonna be interesting to see based on the kinds of things that Adelman is emphasizing here, whether they make any small yet substantive changes to the roster that provide him personnel that is in line with this is the area that I want to improve, not in like and don't just want to rely on the internal development to get us there because like you need a backup 5. Oh, Will, were
Sorry,
you
yeah, I
saying
was
something?
just what I did say when I was muted was that the
Okay.
personnel can really help with the spacing, and so when you're talking about execution, it does come down to having that. And even Adelman said that what was he saying? I forgot my train of thought because I was fixing my audio. Sorry,
No, it's fine.
everybody.
You were talking about personnel spacing. I thought you were just referring to
Yeah, well,
the
he
three-point shooting.
He said like during the playoffs they did walkthroughs on spacing. Like
Right.
they don't have time to practice, so
Right.
it's clearly something that they try to work
Need
on.
live
But
game reps and
yeah,
it just wasn't there. And again, if you want to be ungenerous, you can say, well, you were the offensive coordinator for this team all season. Why is it that they're so off with their timing on these cuts, with their knowledge of these plays that this team, at least the core, has been really running for years now, and all of that? Like, but it's OKC's defense. It's a little bit different. You have to be a little bit sharper. You have less margin for error on these things. So I will be generous in that sense. Okay. Josh Kroenke was also at this press conference. Well, he showed up in his nice gray suit, hair not slicked back, but pushed back, I guess. And he was asked a few questions at this presser, both related to Adelman and the general manager position. For the most part, with the front office stuff, he was kind of like, "There's no new information on that." But there were a few things that caught my eye when it came to how he talked about the organization, and I think you're gonna like this first one. So Josh said that he used the end of the season after he fired Malone and Booth as a litmus test for whether Denver needed a total cultural reset and decided they don't. And it was because of how the players responded. It was because of how they were around the locker room during this playoff run. And I'm sure he didn't say this here, but he was probably contrasting that heavily to how the locker room looked after that Pacers game that made him decide that it was time to, make this dramatic change at the end of the year. Let's see. Right. So my note here is that he agrees with you, Will. He's like, Malone and Booth were the problem. Right? Was that your
yeah.
read on this? Like we excised the problem here. Like these guys are gone. Everything's fine now. Culturally.
I mean, that is definitely one way to look at it. I was thinking more of like the fact that we do have a championship core and we have Jokic, that the culture doesn't really need a huge reset, especially with how well the communication went in the postseason and the buy-in that reportedly we got from the guys. I mean, the results were there to a degree. We went to 7 games with OKC that said we didn't win the championship, so there's still work to do. So let me work in some of these questions too, because we got from Mel Gibson, do you think Jokic will sign an extension? Talking about how Jokic looked frustrated. Hey, if you're to believe Kroenke on this, that the culture doesn't need a reset and they got rid of the Booth and Malone feud, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't sign an extension. He'd almost be crazy to, because then he's going to have to take a pay, or crazy not to. He's going to have to take a pay cut if he went somewhere else. So even if he wanted out, he'd sign it.
He could also just wait a year and sign a bigger extension is the other option.
Yeah. Oh, that's true too. It's just a matter of when he wants to do it. But I expect Jokic is going to be here, y'all. So
Yeah, so I do think that the fact that the players um responded in such a way that told Josh anyway that these guys still want to play together was a big determining factor in him deciding that it wasn't time for a cultural reset either with the roster or the front office, right? I got to say that I had opposite takeaways in that regard. Um that's not to say that I think the culture is like that needs like a total cultural reset or is completely broken. But we talked about this after game 1 and game 2 of the Clippers series. Even if it wasn't on this show, like, talking online, whatever. I was like, the takeaway after those games, how could you come away thinking anything other than like, you guys were clearly not giving a single solitary F word during the regular season because you were not playing defense anything like this at any point during the regular season. At any point. It just wasn't happening. You didn't care. And in those first 2 games, even though they lost game 2, they were playing like they cared. Um, I think after game 3, especially, we didn't have a show after game 3. We had one after game 4. I went on the Dime Pod. And after game 3, I was like, this is the team that we saw during the regular season, where it was like there were just games like this. And even in some winning performances, we were just like, man, this team seems to have a lot more quit in them than I, just recall seeing. It's body language, it's execution, it's like not paying attention to the details of like it's just like going through the motions. And I'm skeptical that something as simple as like, oh well, the coach that everybody wanted gone is gone. It's like, well, this is also the same group of players that decided to pout their way through a season anyway. And it like that's Jokic included, right? Because like second half of the season, like he was just like, defense, what defense? Like this is just, I don't care, right? And it was everybody. Yeah, Jokic was the most very frustrated and mad over the season. Like I get that, but I think that that's part of what Adelman was talking about when he was like, we need to stay professional throughout the season. And I almost wonder, looking at how the last 2 years have gone, what 2024, 2023-24 season would have looked like if KCP had left that summer. Not just with the talent like leaving the roster, but having that other vet in the room who was that one person that was like, I'm taking ownership of the defensive side of the ball, constant communication, keeping like holding guys accountable, like I'll be the bad guy kind of thing. Like, would it have looked like this year? Because you compound that with like that's the year where they could have been they could have had the excuse for having a championship hangover, but it didn't seem like they did because it was like, well, they're like executing at a pretty high level on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah. I mean, the
Yeah.
vocal leadership aspect has been something that many have questioned with Jokic and Jamal because they're the 2 best players on the team. They're supposed to be the first options, but they're not the most vocal people.
And Jamal doesn't play like the second best player on the team for like 2 months
exactly.
of the season either.
So, on our championship year, we had Ish Smith, you had Jeff, you had those guys that the core talked about how they played a huge role in terms of like leading them through that run. They really missed them the championship season, as was shown. And so I don't know if Jokic and Jamal just kind of got complacent with communicating, especially not on the defensive end. That's not like their priority. They're the offensive engines are supposed to be. So with Malone gone, they had to take more ownership of the communication, which it seemed like they stepped up and did in the postseason, or at least AG did as well. And I don't know who else was doing that. I'm sure Russ did to some degree. That's going to have to continue. David Adelman said it is going to continue. You can believe him or not believe him, but
he's
the
probably
team.
like, either it's going to continue or this team's going to fall apart, because he's like, I'm not. It sounds like to him, he's like, I'm not going to fill that vacuum that was there the way that Malone did, because that's kind of what he'd always done. DA is kind of like, I'm going to step back, and either these guys are going to get it together or they're not.
Yeah, and Phil Brown, your comment is just exactly what we were all thinking, and hopefully the group is not like hanging by a thread in terms of breaking apart. But we definitely do need a way to like have more energy in the regular season, because this last season, I mean, how many times did we come back to this show and just talk about like effort? And is it just that they don't have it, or they just don't have the effort? Or are they just lazy? I mean, we talked about it all the
They
time.
like
So
didn't care, and that's the thing is like, I'm not saying that the roster needs to fundamentally change, but their approach definitely does. And it seems like Adelman's approach to that is, honestly, this is another example of like, this is going to be internal development. Like, those guys are going to, for like hell or high water, they're going to become better vocal leaders for this team. And that's going to be their internal development, or yeah, the internal development for the core guys on this team is like, they're going to take ownership of this stuff. And I honestly hope it works out, but I am skeptical about how consistent that's going to be, at least throughout the regular season. Maybe it's one of those things where it's up and down at first, but then ultimately they realize like, this is just the way that things have to be moving forward if we're going to be, a really serious team. Because we can't always rely on Ish Smith to come in and be our like good vibes guy when we need to be holding each other accountable after a bad loss to the Wizards.
yeah, for sure. Well, before we move on to your next point about Ben Tenzer, Hurricane says, does it sound like Josh will be the GM for the time being, no matter who is in the role or not? Kind of get that vibe for sure, and especially how he talked about Ben, if you want to give that quote.
Yeah, absolutely. So Josh really likes Ben Tenzer, right? He mentioned him at the last press conference where he was answering questions about the front office search, as well as David Adelman's hiring by himself. But once again, at this presser, Josh says, first of all, I want to give a big shout out to Ben Tenzer. Just like DA, Ben's been unbelievable. He likes that word unbelievable for Ben Tenzer. I also don't believe it, because I'd like to know what exactly Ben has been doing. Josh actually says, like, there's minimal things that actually go on in that world from a roster standpoint. So I'm like, okay, so what has Ben been doing?
He had to change the feng shui of the office.
But Ben and I, this is no offense to Ben Tenzer, by the way. It's just like very clear that Josh really likes Ben. And I kind of feel like he's planting like longer term seeds for when he just promotes Ben to GM. Maybe saw the initial backlash to the reports about the possibility that Tenzer would get it, and was like, I need to like, quote unquote take my time with this and all that. But he did say they've been spending a lot of time together talking about each individual player on the team and talking about how they can improve them, both as individuals and in the context of the team. It's weird. Like, what do you mean, like, as individuals? Like, do they need to be a better person? Or is this like, how do we get life advice from these guys? And Ben has a lot of great ideas about how we can improve the front office, quote, both internally and externally. Okay, I'm glad I put these 2 points together, because one, I would like to know if Ben does get the GM gig, what those ideas are. I'd like to know what specific things he wants to change, because we talked a lot about the team's culture as more like the players and holding each other accountable, and the way that they interact with the coaching staff and players and coaches alike, like how they were contributing to a toxic culture potentially over this last season, and how they can be better in that sense. But I think that Josh seeing the end of the season and deciding, okay, we don't need a total cultural reset. Does that also mean that the way that the front office does business is going to continue? Now, what are my gripes with the way the front office does business? Everybody has their issue with specific moves that have been made, specific contracts that are on our books. Like, everybody's talking about MPJ, everybody's talking about Jamal, of course, right? I get that. But in terms of like long-standing issues that the team that the organization I think has because of just like doing business because it's the way they've always done business. I think there are some changes that need to go on in the front office, and I'm actually very curious to know if Josh sees that in terms of like being an urgent issue, especially with as important as this offseason could be to put Denver into a place where they can actually contend this year. And that's stuff like we're just throwing player options around like they're candy. Like, whoa, well, it's Denver. Nobody wants to come to Denver. You know who doesn't give out player options? Indiana. Like, what are we talking about here? That's one. The other, we never let players get to restricted free agency. I can understand wanting to avoid that for most of your best players, most if not all, right? Because you're like, well, we're gonna max this guy anyway. Let's just do this, like, whatever. Especially like when they're young. We can't possibly get to restricted free agency with Zeke Najee. That would be a disaster. So let's instead give him a 4-year contract with a player option on the end just to avoid this like dreaded thing of restricted free agency. That's another. The other thing here is it's been quite a number of years since the Nuggets have made any major trade. And I don't mean like trading a core member, but I mean like a trade for a player that's an impact player. It was KCP, right? And I'm gonna get to I probably won't get to like my extended monologue on this, but the reason I think so many people are thirsty for trades within this fan base, just like trades for the sake of trades, is because this front office, and it's not just Calvin, it's this front office has been so reticent to go out and target players that are already in the NBA, like veterans or even like young players that have just been in the league for a few years to try and fill specific roles. Instead, they're looking to the NBA draft to fill specific roles, which, you know, newsflash, one of the teams that is about to make the finals, you know, the Pacers are playing the next day. They'll either close the series out or they'll close it out next game, probably. They're up 3-1. And the Thunder, by the way, they have had major impacts from players that they decided to trade for to fill a specific role. In the Thunder's case, is Alex Caruso, right? And in Indiana's case, they've like picked up guys off the scrap heap and decided you do a thing that we know we can take advantage of. And yes, they're young players, but they are young players that have at least one, as we talked about, one refined skill that we know you can do consistently. Obi Toppin, you're a lob threat, right? Aaron D. Smith, you can shoot. And you can move your feet on defense a little. Like you're not like an all defense caliber guy, but we know we can use you. And though like, but Denver is like, nope, we're only gonna develop the guys that we drafted. These are our guys. And that's it. And we have to make that work. And it's just like, okay. That's my rant on the culture of the Denver Nuggets front office that is separate from the culture of the players and coaches and the guys that we actually see on the court. But I think I'm going to have more to say on that as the offseason progresses.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just needed to get that.
Nothing to add there. There was no backup plan with Booth's Project Dynasty. So if one of those guys didn't really work out, where were they supposed to go? Weren't willing to add any like other vets at the deadline and could barely even pull off a trade from what the reports were saying, because who wants those contracts? So they're going to have to switch gears for sure. I don't know if part of what Ben Tenzer has been doing is kind of restructuring the front office a bit because of how factioned off it was. Like, did he do a better job at like involving some scouts that were maybe pushed out or something? Who knows? I'm just theorizing at this point, but it's going to be hard for any new GM to come in because Adelman and Kroenke were talking about how they're going to have to collaborate. So anyone who's wanting the job is going to have to be like, yeah, I'll work with Adelman. And I just don't know how long that lasts. I don't know how many opinions Adelman has about the roster. I don't know if it's like
A
then
lot
they're
of
just,
people I've heard like projecting onto Adelman, like he's malleable, he's flexible. Like we don't know that.
yeah, we don't know
Like
that yet.
he's also an NBA head coach, and those guys are notoriously stubborn, right? They have their ideas about how things should work. We've already heard that with the offense. It's like we need to work on the details, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, if he has
Yeah.
very specific ideas about how to improve the offense or get back to this high level of execution, he might have some personnel ideas and preferences. He may have given up on some young guys and is like, no, those guys are going to develop. We need to figure out a way to move them, and maybe the GM's going to be on board. But it's like, is then the GM going to be the Adelman puppet kind of thing, or is Adelman really flexible to what the new GM is going to come in and say? But I think it's going to be hard for any GM to come in and really push their unique vision, because you don't want to.
Like this plays into what I was just talking about the front office in that they're so insular. Like they're doing things that they've been doing for years and not really changing how they've done that. Josh mentioned this at the last presser when he was asked about whether he was going to be looking externally at all for a GM position or whatever. It's like, I've promoted internally for this position for the last like 4 general managers. Am I going to do that again? I don't know. And it's just like the same kind of small club of guys that literally always talk to each other.
Yeah. I thought it was funny when they asked him about if he had actually gone forward with receiving a list from like a firm, and he was like, no. There's no.
Like,
I thought he
talking about that.
I almost think he regretted
that
saying
was just
that.
something
How
I
he shut
said.
that down.
That was just something I said last week, guys. You're not supposed to ask me about it.
Yeah.
I don't think when he said that, by the way, I don't think anybody actually thought that he was going to be getting general manager names from some outside headhunting firm.
But he was like, I'll use all my connections available to me.
All my contacts. Yeah. The billionaire's Rolodex. Yeah. I said that we might know who the general manager is by today. I don't know. The Timberwolves have been eliminated from the playoffs, by the way. And we have no news on that front just yet. Phil Brown, I'm also super intrigued about Matt Lloyd. Timberwolves took our guy. Let's take their second guy. Yeah, sure. I just would like someone's outside perspective. And so this is my last point from the press conference, actually. I think it plays into sort of both of these points here. Mark Kisla from the Denver Gazette asked this question, and I wanted to get the full quote right. So let me just read this full question here. For the last 2 years, you've fallen just short of halfway to a championship. On your roster now, do you have the talent to win a championship? And in hiring a general manager, do you want somebody to challenge you on that idea or not? I thought that was an excellent question.
Yeah. I think that's like kind of what I'm trying to hint at with the idea that it'll be tough for any GM that comes in, because you want to have your own ideas, but you also know that a prerequisite for the job is that you're like very in lockstep with this unification idea. I think there is a world where you have someone who has a very unique idea or like a very strong stance on the roster and the moves the Nuggets need to make, and Kroenke and Adelman buy into that as well. It's not necessarily a given that they're not going to get along, but so they definitely need to be challenged on that, and they do need to take a really objective look at it. It's hard because as someone who, I don't necessarily want to have like extreme takes. I will, like on Twitter, I feel like a lot of my shit's exaggerated just by nature of the platform. But
I thought Will was a completely different person, by the way, before I actually talked to him outside of Twitter. I thought he was this hot takesman based on your timeline.
I'm more hot takesman on Twitter and more moderate here on the show. But like, I could be convinced that, the core is fine. You just need to add some NBA players around them, like Hurricane said earlier. It can go bad if you change a championship core. Like, we've seen that so many times in different sports where you start moving the guys who won the championship and things just start falling apart. So I do think it's a good point to be cautious with that. But at the same time, I think there are players who maybe aren't going to develop into something that we need, and or our problems, and or there's a reality of the roster and the cap that we may have to make some tough decisions in order to try to navigate that. Because we're seeing that the more kind of top heavy you are, the harder it is to win in this league. And the Thunder are really proving that, even if they're kind of like a very extreme example
they're
of,
like super young, so
yeah,
they're going to be top heavy in like 3 years.
yeah, exactly. So,
But they're super young, so like Jalen Williams is making $5 billion this year.
yeah. So they definitely need to be challenged. I mean, I assume you agree.
Yeah, I do. And I want to go over Josh and Adelman's answers on this because they both gave answers here. Josh said, quote, "It starts with belief."
We can
He
do
really
it.
wanted to emphasize that, like, at least publicly, at least with these players now, and I sort of get this approach because they are a bit strapped this offseason. They don't know who's going to be here, who's going to be left at the end of the summer. And you don't want to go into the season with guys thinking that they weren't enough. But I feel like at this point that, like, Jokic said, end of the year, like, this team's like, was this enough to win a championship? And Jokic was like, no, we didn't. We didn't. So it wasn't. Right. And so Josh wants to lean heavily into this narrative of internal development is the way. Like, currently as constructed, no, we're not enough. But if these guys get better, if Jamal gets better, if MPJ gets better, if Peyton Watson gets better, it's not just the young guys, right? Then we can be enough to win a championship. Um Adelman, to your point about the shooting, uh let's see. Yeah, so he basically said what I just said. As currently constructed, it's not enough to, win a championship in terms of, he was asked about the roster. But what are people in these rooms going to be doing to make themselves better? And he kind of makes my point here about, like, you don't want to, like, trash talk uh the roster too much in this regard, especially if you don't know. No, CT. Especially if you don't know, like, who is going to be left here at the end of the summer, because you don't know what deals are going to be available or not. But DA says everybody's got to believe that they can get better, right? Especially with, like, all these young players on the roster, and we have so many that are on a certain developmental curve. The scary thing about it is, like, well, OKC is also really young. All those guys can come back better next year, and they probably will, because especially Chet, because he, like, didn't have a full season to, settle into that role.
Mm-hmm. Hurricane says life is about picking your problems. What problems would a GM rather solve? Not going to be easy. Yeah, so they're going to, I mean, they definitely have to have a GM who, I think, yeah, bold approach has to be taken at least initially. And if they do come to the conclusion with, like, a very hard and objective look at it that the best thing is to bring the core back, that's great. Then they could maybe reassess at the deadline depending on how the season's going. But we'll have to see. Do we want to talk about the shooting though? Because
yes,
I definitely do.
Because this was, again, David Adelman kind of espousing the company line. He was asked a question. It was actually kind of funny because it was related to, what's that old show with Scully and Mulder? X-Files.
Mm-hmm.
Can't find this in the transcript. Okay, but anyway, he was asked, like, if you could basically wave a magic wand, or if alien life form could, like, give you what you wanted in your bench, like, what would it be? Like, skill wise, like, we're not talking about players, but skill wise, and that could come obviously through development or from, like, new players. And DA said shooting. He's like, consistent shooting. Shooting in big games and big moments. That was really important. He talked about how he doesn't look at percentages from the regular seasons. That stuff's not real. It felt like, to me, it felt a little bit pointed at Christian Brown in particular, because his regular season versus playoff shooting splits were definitely a thing. He also went through dry spells during the regular season. He had a really hot start to the season last year, or this past year. where he was shooting like 50% or something in the first few weeks of the year, and then he like couldn't buy a bucket for a while, at least from outside. Um, and then it kind of stabilized, but it was more like up and down. And that was, I think, around the time when we got that quote from Jokic early in the season where he's like, "We're a streaky shooting team." And so I understand DA wanting to focus on consistent shooting, but he followed that up by saying, the way that we can get there is through internal development. Is through these guys getting better at making shots in high pressure situations and all of that. And he sort of elaborates on the ways that you can train. It's different than, shooting 500 shots in an empty gym. I kind of wonder if he's like, well, Christian should be practicing making corner threes with like his mom, like waving like a simulated objects like they would get at the wall at the Intuit Dome or something, just at him trying to distract. I don't know what what it is that DA wants him to do in terms of like immersive training. Um, but that's what he went to. And I think the thing that stood out to me is that it was very company line. He was clearly like, all right, I'm ready to like say the thing that you guys need me to say, which is internal development is the way, even though I acknowledge that like the skill just might not come there, right?
Yeah. That's the fear is like you can hope that they become more consistent shooters, but what's the reality? Are they just not good enough, or do they just need to put the work in and get more reps at it? Do they need more game time to shoot and like feel more confident when the moment comes? I don't know. I'm skeptical of some players more than others, but I'm just glad that this was brought up because I definitely felt it in the playoffs. It was very frustrating
Yeah,
to
Will
me.
wins again.
I was calling
Shooting
it.
is the thing, at least that this coaching staff wants.
Wow, breaking news. Shooting in the NBA is very important. No, but yeah, because people were pointing to the percentages that, we're a 40% shooting 3-point team, but we don't take a lot of threes. I think if we took more, the percentages would probably come down because we often just choose the right moments to shoot, or like they hunt like the best shot theoretically when you have Jokic on your team. So I think that plays into a bit, but we missed so many open shots and threes versus the Thunder that if we just hit, we could be talking about a different narrative right now. But I just like felt that the shooting was not solid enough. And even if like the stats were there or percentages were decent, teams didn't care about that. And so they're playing the defense a specific way, not closing out to CB or Russ and what have you, even though if they hit threes in some moments, it wasn't enough of the big moments. So is it unfair to maybe rely on those players to do that? Maybe, because it's like these are the guys that you've chosen to put on your team. But yeah, it's going to be tough, but I definitely want more consistent shooting in the big moments. That's going to be key. And that's easy to say. I mean, we all want that. And you're going to go through cold stretches, but what can you do to like minimize the chances that you will go cold in the playoffs? Like what players can you put around the team? And what can you do to give them more confidence? Like we'll see. I'm definitely skeptical of certain players becoming that. And I do think we should look elsewhere to maybe add a bit more consistent shooting.
Can I tell you the reason that I don't focus as much on shooting when I look
Yeah.
at what this roster needs? It's that very thing that you said at the end there, which is like, is it fair to rely on these guys to, constantly make these shots? It's also the fact that maybe not every defense, but I know for a fact OKC will not care even if those guys make shots. They will keep defending you the same way that they do in terms of like walling off the paint and doing everything they possibly can to get the ball out of Jokic and Jamal's hands by the end of that series. If you have other guys that can kind of take some of the creation pressure off of Jamal and Jokic, you know what you get? More easy shots for your best players that you not only can rely on, but should rely on. Instead of Christian Brown took 9 threes today. It's like, that's not a sign of a healthy offense.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want that happening every game?
Yeah, and if you are playing into the hand that OKC is dealing you on defense,
Right.
and just settling for a lot of the threes, which I think the way that they were playing defense demanded that with shrinking the floor. Like if you make those shots, that's great. Then you can beat OKC. But there are other ways that you can attack them. And how much do you want to play the shooting variance game from three unless you have like the most reliable shooters out there? And I don't know if Denver's going to be able to add those
Boston
players.
Celtics, that's all you do all the time. And look at them.
Yeah,
Even before
live and die
Tatum
by
got
it.
injured, they were about to go down 3-1 in that series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think there's some improvement we can do there for sure, and I'm hoping for it, but I do love the idea of having another creator to free up Jokic and Jamal. That sounds excellent too, but it's like we've been talking about, it's hard to fix every single problem, so what are they going to choose first?
True. You got to triage, and I get that. It's like, well, we need shooting. That's at least not easy to find, but easy to see how it could get better.
But you just don't really want like the 3-point specialists to come in who like can't really play defense and can't really dribble or do anything else. Like, that's like one of your fears.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, that gets us through the Adelman press conference. Will, do you want to touch a little bit on some of the conference finals stuff here?
Yeah, we can go broad, a little bit broad on it.
Let's go broad here. So I'll give the quick like where we are. The Knicks are down 3-1. They're going back home tonight, like just an hour or so after this stream. And Indiana can either finish it off or they can finish it off at home in 6. I think the Pacers are going to win this game. There's a lot of like data about like trends, like when you're the road team and you're up 3-1, you don't usually win this game, whatever. Indiana has taken a very professional approach to these closeout games. Even like the one where they won against the Bucks in round 1, where the Bucks were actually leading for most of that game. Indiana was like, you know what? No, like we want to try to close this out here. Like they were already up 3-1. I think it was in Indiana because they're the higher seed at that point. And then they forced overtime. And then obviously they win with that crazy, sequence of like Gary Trent giveth and Gary Trent taketh away, sequence. So I think they're going to win, but if they don't, they'll probably win in 6. I hope they win tonight so that they can get well rested before OKC, because they have literally no chance in that series if they let this go long. The Wolves are out. The Thunder closed out in 5 as I thought they would. I do think that game 5 was even more lopsided than I expected it to be. So we're probably going to get a Thunder Pacers finals. So let's jump to that, Will. On what are the narrative stakes of this NBA finals? First question I have is, does the regular season matter?
I would say, yeah. You got to get at least a 3 seed. Like, I think the Thunder are probably going to win, so it's another case of number 1 seed winning it all. Like, they had to go through Denver, so that's not necessarily the most typical thing, though. I don't know, Denver probably was a 4 seed, but there was a world if they took the regular season a little bit more seriously, would have been higher. Maybe Thunder don't play.
You don't lose
the Nuggets to
Wizards.
Yeah, maybe they don't play to the Western Conference Finals, but that would have been a harder series then for the Thunder than the Wolves were. But yeah, you gotta give yourself the best chance to like be healthy too. Like if you can kind of take the last month off like we did on the championship season, that seems awesome to me. But yeah, I don't think the Thunder really like rested a ton, but they just have young dudes.
They did for the last like 2 weeks.
Oh, did they? Okay,
right.
Not a whole month then, at least.
Yeah, I remember like the last game I remember seeing their starters play was that win against the Lakers after the blowout loss against the Lakers, where the Lakers fans were complaining about the refs the whole time afterward. I do think the regular season matters in the West. I just don't think it matters in the Eastern Conference at all.
Yeah, 2 different leagues.
Over the last few years. The Heat making the finals was the first the first thing that tipped me off to that in 2023. Obviously, Boston wins it last year. And honestly, they were the best team. They were best team last year, but
LeBron always did this too, where they were like the 4th or 5th seed throughout the season with the Cavs, and people were like, almost panicking, and he was like, "It doesn't matter, you guys. I'm going to make the finals anyway." But it was a different era. He had, that was the super team era. So
It was still the East, though.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
and the
still the
East was
East.
even worse than it is now, probably. I don't know. Maybe like the East is better at the top now, but it's worse in the middle and lower. I don't know. It's never been great. I think the Eastern Conference, if the Pacers lose in like if they allow 3 blowout, like if they look like the Timberwolves did, frankly, and they won their conference, I think the East needs to be relegated to a lower league. They need to be relegated to the G League until further notice, and then we split the Western Conference up into 2 separate conferences.
Yeah. Man, I will say though, I don't know if you want to go into this too much
Yeah,
because
go
I
ahead.
already talked about it a bit. I just kept thinking about just how different the league is becoming with the Thunder, and people were pointing out how so many of the recent champions, even before the CBA, had their best players on their rookie scale like extensions.
Yep,
And as
including the
soon,
Nuggets, because
yeah,
I believe Jokic's supermax didn't kick in until last season.
and
So
that small percent, like, I mean, it is like a lot more money that they get on the next big like supermax deals, but just like the extra percentage points of the cap it's taking up is a huge blow to then adding other players. And it's just, you can see the league trending in certain ways. And I'm like, the Thunder were able to take advantage of it with like players from 22 through 26 and running to the finals. And because you don't have like a team like the KD Warriors like holding down the
well, it
league
helps that
anymore.
they traded Paul George for SGA and 7 first-round picks or whatever.
Yeah, they definitely got a
Like,
little lucky with SGA becoming who he was in that trade being so bad. But yeah, it's just like sad from a Nuggets fan perspective because we're not having the type of Thunder run as they're like there's a huge runway for their continued success, and Jamal had the ACL that maybe that was our time to win multiple championships. But I still think we can get one in this era because thankfully we did look pretty competitive against OKC. A lot of that was going around, seeing the Wolves being eliminated in 5 was how great the Nuggets looked and how great Jokic looked versus the Thunder team, and more of the moral victory stuff, even though I think people weren't trying to push a moral victory. They were just trying to be like honest and at least
it
proud
was
of the
just like
team.
this, like, that's the thing is I agree. I was one of the people who after the Thunder series, I'm just like, well, it has to be impressive to me because I picked Thunder in 5, and obviously they pushed them to 7. Matt Moore has like he's going on a whole crusade right now about like actually the Wolves were like a way better team than Denver. I was like, I don't really care about that. My point is like there's a bit of incongruity here where look, I think that the Thunder are a good matchup for the Nuggets and that the Nuggets should feel good about that matchup. But OKC was just a better team this year. Like they were too good for, Denver's matchup advantages to, overcome that. I think Minnesota is like probably the Thunder, in addition to being the best team in the West, were the worst possible matchup for Minnesota because of how good their paint protection is and how they make you play offense with like quick decision making and like trusting your teammates and like constantly not just moving the ball but like playing a certain way. Minnesota was like very uncomfortable that entire series outside of game 3 offensively. And I would say that like Denver had more outs, which is like, for as stagnant as people, think of our offense as being and how people, when the Wolves play us, they look super dynamic offensively, right? Um, but outside of that, it was just a really tough watch. So as somebody who honestly wants to find reasons to downplay what Denver was able to do, because I think that we need to take a harder look at our roster and like how the organization functions as a whole. But it's hard to do that when you see like, yeah, we are probably going to be the team that pushes the Thunder as far as they can without actually losing that series. Matt Moore has a whole thing about like, well, game 1 was so wonky. Well, look, to win a series, you need your best player to win your game. You need your second best player to win your game. You need your role players to win your game. And then you need to win a game that you have no business winning. That's just how it goes, right? And I could point to that game for each of Denver's series in the title run, except the Sun series, because that was so like there were no games there where I'm like Denver shouldn't have won that game, right? And I bring up the Suns because they're a team that felt like after 2023, well, we're the team that pushed Denver the furthest. We pushed it 6 games. Just again funny because our pal Brucey B went on that podcast after the season and said the Suns, no, like those were just blowouts. Our toughest series was actually like the Timberwolves or something, whatever, right? So series can feel different. So I don't want to say like just pushing the Thunder to 7 is what was impressive. It was just like, yeah, there were parts of some of these games where, yeah, they were in control. Like they never looked so out of sorts that they didn't look like they didn't belong on the same floor except for 2 games. And Minnesota had 3 of those games. So I said this last episode where I'm like, well, we had 2 blowout losses. Maybe Minnesota will just have those 2. But then obviously game 5 went the way that it went.
Yeah.
So it's hard to simultaneously be like, well, Minnesota's like so good and the Thunder were just that much better than them, and say like Denver is just not even close, right?
No.
It's not true. And I think even with a good matchup, like there were games in there where like I wouldn't say that guys even like totally gave up in game 7, right? Even though the odds were completely stacked against them being on the road against this team.
Yeah. Right, and
yeah.
all the injuries
They
and
were just
AG.
like outplayed. Whereas I feel like the Timberwolves gave up in the first quarter of game 5. That's disappointing.
Yeah.
Even as somebody that wants to and does hate the Timberwolves. It's like, dude, come on. Like this is your job. It's like playing professional basketball is your job. And you're just like, nope, I'm right. Like they were 1-2-3 Cancooning midway through the first quarter.
I was asking about if they got swept, what the implications of that would be, because that would be the Wolves to the Thunder. I think like changes are probably coming anyway. They won 1 game. What's that really going to change? So I'm excited for that. Phil Brown says Minnesota or Memphis could move to the East if there was expansion. That could help balance conferences. Yeah, I've dreamed of Minnesota going East too, but only 1 team would have to go.
Yeah, well, expansion, that's probably not going to happen for at least another season and probably 2 because Adam Silver has slow walked this expansion thing.
Snoozer says Stars got to win a ring their first 7 years. After that, Supermax contract hamstrings the team. Yeah, I'm like, as soon as you get paid, enjoy your retirement league and just playing for fun.
I get this thing about the Supermax deal, but honestly, I think it has less to do with their top paid player and the 2 and 3 after that. The number 2 and number 3 after that. Just because I'm just as somebody who is in the cap weeds now that we're in the off season, I'm looking at what all these different teams are doing and thinking about what Denver can do. I'm like, there are still options out there, and even like it has nothing to do with Jokic making it Supermax. Like Jokic makes it Supermax and he outplays that value by a lot versus the number 2 and number 3 players that make their max contracts that are different from each other and not quite a Supermax. I want to make that clear, and we'll talk about that more in the off season. It's difficult to have contracts on your books where the guy's out producing. Most Supermax contracts, I would say the guy's worth it, but obviously you have like the Bradley Beals of the world and like Katie is getting questionable up there, but I don't think anybody questions whether like Steph Curry's worth his Supermax. That team can't score. He allows that team to score just by being on the floor, not even making shots. Okay, that's his value, right?
Yeah. I pulled up the comment earlier. Astrid said 1 max contract, unless players are taking a discount. Yeah, I think something along those lines will happen, or at least like teams will be more worried about how many big contracts they have, and that's all playing out. I just don't know how a lot of these teams already have them, get off of them, and they're gonna have to like wait out, let some of those expire almost. Miseria says we're gonna listen about we pushed OKC to 7 all summer. That's like the
area. We are going to be pushing back against all of that because guess what? The Suns pushed us to 6 in 2023, and they were the saddest team that Denver faced in that title run.
Yeah, now they're not even in the playoffs. Yeah, I think with Matt Moore, like trying to resist that narrative too, is just he doesn't want the Nuggets to be complacent, really. And I think a lot of fans agree with
Matt
that.
Moore cares what the Nuggets do.
I think he has an opinion on the direction they should go as someone who covers them, but
he doesn't have a stake in it either. Like, he's not a fan of the team.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that's part of why he's pushing back a little bit. And anyway. But I think
he also just likes the Wolves more. He's kind of a Wolves guy, even though they're not his team. He's like I gotta stick up for these small market teams so that people aren't like Ant should become a Laker.
He said he thought it was funny that Nuggets fans didn't like the Thunder because they're also a small market team. But he also
peasants hate each other. Okay.
Yeah, he said in the analysis of that series, like, it doesn't matter what the point differential is. You just have to try to be the better team in that series and just win the 4 games. But then as soon as like this whole push Thunder to 7 thing started, he was like, okay, but they had these blowouts. Like, I thought it was funny.
But and also he's like, well, and the Minnesota path was totally real, guys. Like, they would have beaten the Warriors without Steph anyway. Whereas, like, if it was another team, if it was like the Suns, you'd be like, yeah, and you faced all these injured teams.
Yep. So
like, okay. He also picked the Lakers against the Wolves, by the way, just like me in round 1. So I think he's trying to atone a little too hard for that sin. Yeah, that's all.
Right.
Matt. Any other interesting questions or comments coming from the chat right now? Jay Kerr says Adelman seems more accommodating than Malone. I doubt he'll recreate the same Malone Booth drama. I doubt that either, because both Malone and Booth are not here. But it's less about the drama. It's more about, like, there are inherent frictions with this plan. And I think this was like an earlier comment by Hurricane Teabag, who said this having too many young players impedes on each individual one's development. Like, it's just hard to develop all these young players on a non-tanking team, and even on tanking teams, right? Because you're not like playing in a competitive environment, whatever. Having good veterans around young players helps them to develop, because often if you have the right good veterans around those guys, they're able to augment their skills, versus having a bunch of young players that are all still trying to develop their games while and in no way necessarily complementing each other, right? This is something that I think I talked about on the show, where I was just like, the thing with Peyton is, like, our roster needs more like veteran consistent shooting in order to bring out what potential people think he has as like a slasher and ball handler. We don't have that because we're waiting on these other guys to develop into that, for example. And in addition, obviously, you're like talking about minutes and splitting that up. There's only so many minutes in a basketball game. There's only so many minutes that guys can play next to Jokic as well. Like, I definitely think that has been an impediment to the development plan. There are very few teams in the league outside of, like I said, tanking teams that have as many rookie scale contracts on their roster.
Yeah, that's why I was thinking, the league does all this stuff to deter tanking, but then, the Thunder become this superpower through like excessive tanking. That said, they made all the right decisions afterwards and got a little bit lucky.
They also traded Paul George for 7 first round picks. Like, it's not their own picks that is getting them all of this stuff. Like, SGA, they got through a trade. Another player, like, great player, he got through a trade. I'm just saying, like, not everything is about drafting and developing the guys that you draft. Like, sometimes you have to be able to make these shrewd moves. Not to say that there's an SGA level player that Denver.
Yeah, because Celtics added Drew Holiday. And we added KCP and Bruce. Yep. Thunder added Caruso, Hartenstein. You got to like add some real guys, and I think Caruso completely changed the outlook of like their ability to compete. And they're probably going to win.
We win that series if Caruso's not on their team, even if they traded Giddey for like a another good player. Like Caruso was just had that much of an outsized impact with like he was not a negative offensive player and was an incredibly impactful defensive player, right? Specialists don't play in the playoffs, as Malone said, versus some of their other guys are like a little bit more one side of the ball or not quite high level impact on either side of the ball as Caruso was defensively, for example. Case and Wallace was also good, but like it's like, okay, we got Case and Wallace. Like he's our rookie scale guy that we're developing right now. It's not like obviously Jalen Williams and Chet, they're high lottery pick starters, like they're good. That's different than like Case and Wallace is really the only young guy in the playoffs that they had that has this inconsistent bench role. We're just gonna kind of like plug you in when we're trying some stuff out, and that can be a tough road to be on as a young player, let alone when you're trying to do that with multiple young players throughout your roster. And everyone likes to focus on their age and the fact that a bunch of these guys were drafted, but Case and Wallace is really the only, like we've got like 4 Case and Wallaces that are not quite as good as Case and Wallace, but have like even more inconsistent roles as Case and Wallace, right? It's tough.
Chat's pointing out how many picks the Thunder have. Astrid asks, would there be some change or rule that would limit how many draft picks you can have?
No, because they're not voting on a new CBA for another 10 years. Sorry.
God, we need some change.
They can change rules in the interim, but they rarely do something that big. I'm actually looking at OKC's stash right now. They have 1, 2, 3 Phillies keeping their pick. What pick did Utah get? I think they get to keep their pick. So they have 4 picks and a pick swap with Miami this draft. They're probably gonna trade because they're not gonna draft 4 guys. Probably they might like trade for like swap it for like a future first from somebody. Drop one of these. I don't know which one they have. They have one from the Clippers from the Paul George trade. They have one from Houston. This is why Houston wanted to get competitive. By the way, they don't own all their picks for the next couple of years.
Yeah.
They have one from. Oh, my bad. I missed one. The Wizards actually own OKC's pick for this year. And it's part of the pick swap, situation. But then obviously they've got they've got like 3. They've got at least 2 picks for the next 5 years after that.
Yeah. It seems like dark times in the NBA for this Thunder dominance, but we're gonna try to make the most of Jokic's prime. I can only hope, though. I totally get people who are frustrated with what the Nuggets have done so far.
Everybody's talking about wanting creativity from the coaching staff. I would like some more creativity and outside thinking from the front office as well. And I think a lot of fans agree with that too. It's not just like we have to trade MPJ for like Patrick Williams and whatever from the Bulls. I think people forget that Patrick Williams just signed a 5-year deal with the Chicago Bulls. You don't necessarily want to take on that contract. But if you are looking to target specific good players that can add something to your team, that's where, that's like a responsible approach to. And it's not like Denver has never done this because like we said, KCP, Aaron Gordon, etc. They were like, we identify this need. We found a player that we like. We're going to try to get this deal done. That's different than just like trades for the sake of trades. And I want people to remember that as we move through this offseason where frankly, I expect them to do not much of anything.
Yeah, that's a good point. OKC will keep getting their more draft picks by trading away their draft bench players. Yeah, they have more flexibility than
maybe, but it depends. It depends on other teams wanting to give them first round picks for Aaron Wiggins.
Yeah,
right.
I also think that's why like the teams like the Rockets and the Spurs could look at this and be like, maybe we should be going a little bit more all in than we would think for this timeline, because look at what the NBA, look at how it's trending. Spurs don't have to wait 7 years for Wemby. Like, go for it right now. Get aggressive.
Yeah.
But
Good point. Which makes Denver's job even harder.
Stupid West.
Stupid West. All right. Well, thank you for everybody who has made it this far in the stream. We really appreciate you. We appreciate everybody's comments in the chat as well. We love all the questions about contracts and all that. We're going to have a bunch of great off-season shows for everybody, breaking down everything from Denver's cap sheet, what they're allowed to do in terms of trades, in terms of free agency this year, projecting forward what are some of the things that they might do if they get a little crazy, as well as, of course, how it relates to players we can target on other teams. Good trade fodder, as opposed to trading good players for the sake of trading good players. Which, honestly, music to the Cronkies' ears if they have an excuse to try to get under the luxury tax by trading away a big contract. But I don't think they're going to do that this summer. If you do like our content, please remember to click the like button and the subscribe button. Also, hit the notification bell. Leave us a review. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, etc. All our social links are in the description. We'll probably do more stuff with the other social sites in the summer, just because we'll have more sort of bite-sized content as the kids like these days. And always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks, because then you don't have to watch other teams take your spot in the NBA Finals.
See everyone. Thanks for joining.